Hello everyone, and welcome to Monster Mondays, episode 19. We've got one more to go of this, and we're caught up for the Monster Monday series. As of this post, I've got 2 more Writer Wednesdays to do, and 4 more Sad Year Days segments, so here goes nothing. And this time I got my church key, as they would have called it back in the day. I have to say, one of the side effects of doing these segments, especially like really late at night, like past midnight or so, is I tend to find myself kind of looking around for possible dangers as I'm exiting my garage and going back into my house. So maybe a little bit of this will take the edge off. We shall see. Don't drink if you're under 21, kids, and don't overdo it if you are 21 or older. And now for part 2 of our Miscellaneous Monsters for episode 19. Yeah, I know, real original, but as I said before in the last episode, either I split into 2 episodes or you'd have 3 or 4 hour video, presuming 20 to 24 pages takes about half an hour to 45 minutes to read. 60 pages plus usually takes about 2 hours and 20 minutes. The original script for the last episode would have been a whopping 73 pages. And from what I've seen of this, oh man. I thought I split it in half, but while I split the number of stories in half, a lot of the stories for the last one were much shorter. So I might have just, only done a third of it at best, so strap in and get yourself a drink of some kind, to get through this. Relax yourself. I won't be offended if you fall asleep. I won't even know. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's pick up where we left off. Cue the music. Here we go. And we begin with Mr. Widemouth. My family was like a drop of water in a vast river during my childhood, never remaining in one location for long. When I was 8, we settled in Rhode Island, and there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in the attic of my brain which belong to various homes we lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless. Chasing after another boy in the backyard of the house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft on the creek behind an apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. There was one set of memories that remains as clear as glass, as though they were just made yesterday. I often wondered whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the long sickness I'd experienced that spring, but I know they are genuine in my heart. We lived in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine. Population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were several rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways it was a waste of space, but it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour's commute to my father's place of work. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was horrible timing to be bedridden. We're in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things are already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and these served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't precisely recall how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the tiny creature was asking him if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, his eyes, his crooked ears, but his mouth was by far the largest. "You look kind of like a Furby," I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and gave me a puzzled look. "Furby? What's a Furby?" he asked. I shrugged. "You know, the toy, the little robot with the big ears. You can pet him and feed him almost like a real pet." "Oh," Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity. "You don't need one of those. They aren't the same as having a real friend." I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stopped by to check on me. "I lay under your bed," he later explained. "I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore." We didn't do much during this first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. Books, you say? The third or fourth morning after I met him, he greeted me with a giant smile on his face. "I have a new game we can play," he said. "We have to wait until your mother comes to check on you because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game." After my mother delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged at my hand. "We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway," he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bed without their permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open. He then beckoned me to look out at the ground below. We're on the second story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle the drop was farther than the 2 stories due to the incline. "I like to play up here," Mr. Widemouth explained. "I pretend there's a big soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. If you pretend hard enough, you'll bounce back like a feather. I want you to try." That's not threatening at all. I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so that only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. "It's a long drop," I said. "But that's part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was just a short drop. If it were that way, you might as well bounce on a real trampoline." I toyed with the idea, picturing myself falling through the thin air, only to bounce back into the window on something unseen by human eyes. But the realist in me prevailed. "Maybe some other time," I said. "I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt." Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. "If you say so," he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. And yes, I'm totally trying to kind of give him a Pennywise inflection. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box. "I want to teach you how to juggle," he said. "Here's some things you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons." I looked in the box. It was full of knives. "My parents will kill me," I shouted, horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room. Objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. "I'll be spanked and grounded for a year." Mr. Widemouth frowned. "It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it." Yeah, he's definitely trying to kill the kid now. I pushed the box away. "I can't. I'll get in trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air." Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed. Remaining there the rest of the day, I began to wonder how often he was under me. I started to have trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night saying he put a real trampoline under the window, a big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined it and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraging me to jump. He wasn't so fun to play with anymore. My mother came to me one morning and told me I had her permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined to my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feeling of the sun on my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me. "I have something I want you to see," he said. I must have given him a worried look because he then said, "It's safe, I promise." I followed him to the beginning of the deer trail that ran through the woods behind the house. "This is an important path," he explained. "I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day I hope to take you there." I returned to the house wondering what kind of place lay beyond the trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into a moving truck. I would be in the cab of that truck sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth I'd be leaving, but even at 5 years old I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intentions were not to my benefit. Gee, you think? Despite what he said otherwise, for this reason I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. I was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. Rather, he was hoping. Okay. He seemed more like a man who's about to run a marathon than one who's about to spend 2 days sitting still. Early enough for you? He asked. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. This is the last move, son, I promise. I know it's hard for you, sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make friends. Oops, wrong voice for him, but whatever. This is the last move, son. I promise I know it's hard for you, sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make friends. This is why you shouldn't read when drinking. It mix your voices up. And not care to edit it out. Because, heck, everyone knows I'm not perfect. Opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. He gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in hand. I didn't wave back. Probably dodged a knife there. Years later, I returned to New Vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty, except for the foundation, as the house burned down a few years ago after my family left. Out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had shown me. Part of me expected him to jump out from behind a tree and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed many of the tombstones belonged to children. Credit to Perfect Circle 35. Wow. And that was Mr. Widemouth. Final thoughts? Very well put together, and, it kept us kind of guessing what he would do next, or suggest next, but we had a pretty smart protagonist, so as far as I can tell, he didn't succumb to any sort of doom at this point. Quite the contrary. It's kind of nice to see that that he got to see what would have been him if he had been any dumber than he was, or any more trusting, I guess, because let's face it, at 5 you don't have the same reasoning skills you do when you're my age. But yeah, those are just my thoughts on the story, and with that we move on to our next one, which is a little bit shorter it seems, so let's see, this one is called well, I'll have the name of it in the description below for this one. But I always post them in the order that I read them, so not to worry. You're not gonna miss out on whatever the title happens to be. It's just sometimes when I print these things out or copy-paste them, the titles don't always transfer over as much as I'd like them to. So anyway, with this pasta we see a man went to a hotel and walked up to the front desk to check in. The woman at the desk gave him a key and told him that on the way to his room there was a door with no number that was locked and no one was allowed in there. Especially no one should look inside the room under any circumstances. So he followed the woman's instructions at the front desk, going straight to his room and going to bed. The next night his curiosity would not leave him alone about the room with no number on the door. He walked down the hall to the door and tried to turn the handle. Sure enough, it was locked. He bent down and looked through the wide keyhole. Cold air passed through it, chilling his eye. He saw the hotel bedroom like his. In the corner was a woman whose skin was completely white. She was leaning her head against the wall, facing away from the door. He stared in confusion for a while. He almost knocked on the door out of curiosity, but decided not to. This disinclination saved his life. He crept away from the door and walked back to his room. The next day he returned to the door and looked through the wide keyhole. This time all he saw was redness. He couldn't make out anything besides a distinct red color, unmoving. Perhaps the room inhabitants knew he was spying the night before and had blocked the keyhole with something red. At this point he decided to consult the woman at the front desk for more information. She sighed and said, "Did you look through the keyhole?" The man told her that he had, and she said, "Well, I might as well tell you the story. A long time ago a man murdered his wife in that room, and her ghost haunts it, but these people were not ordinary. They were white all over except for their red eyes." Credit to Anonymous. And that was... the description for the name of this one. Well, that's short, sweet. I don't really know what to say about it with respect to... It built up, I guess, pretty well, but it could stand to use a little bit more, maybe. I want to say, you know, have it be done gradually over a series of different looking through the peephole because this person's too curious, for lack of better words. But that's pretty much all I have to say about that. And so for this next creepypasta we have You Can't Trust Everyone by Lost White. November 6th, 2015. Oh boy, I'm not really sure how to properly start these types of stories, but I'm going to try to get to the point as fast as possible. See, I'm kind of on a timer here. I'm currently writing this on one of the computers in the library at my college. As I type, I feel like I'm being watched from the shadows. I know it sounds crazy, but I need to get the story out somehow. Nobody here will believe anything I say. I'm falling behind on my schoolwork. It's to the point where I might be put on academic probation. I also got fired from my part-time job because I was scaring the customers. Anyways, I want to at least do something to tell myself this was all worth it. Even still, it might not matter in the end. Last year I met a guy named Jack Driscoll. Jack was a pretty chill dude for the most part, and we actually became pretty good friends. My name is Ethan, by the way, and I'm currently finishing up my senior year in college. Well, trying to finish up my senior year anyways. As I was saying, Jack and I started to become good friends after we found out we're pretty much into all the same stuff. We both like the same kinds of video games, the same movie genres, and even had the same taste in clothes. I had other friends, sure, but nobody was interested in the same things I was. Sadly, this all changed last winter. Jack started hanging out with a girl from one of our classes named Eliza. It wasn't long before he asked her out, and the two became an item. At first I was happy for him. He never had the best luck with ladies, so it was nice to see him with someone who genuinely liked him. We would all hang out from time to time, and she came off as a really nice girl. Hell, I was even found myself getting a little jealous. About a month into their relationship, I noticed things started to change. Jack would stop hanging out with his friends and spend more time with Eliza. At first I figured this is normal. Many people will want to spend more time with their significant other. And there really isn't anything wrong with that. I'd still see him, and we'd play video games online together after class, so I didn't overthink it. Then things started to get weird. One morning, the two of us were waiting in line in the cafeteria. Food at our school wasn't the best, but it was okay for what it was. We got there a little late, so the line was already pretty long. But nothing we weren't used to. Guess we should have got here earlier, huh? I laughed. Jack didn't say anything. Hey buddy, you still asleep? I joked as I nudged his shoulder. Shut up, he murmured. I was taken aback by his response since he sounded genuinely angry. I'm only joking, I explained. Did you not get enough sleep last night, or what? This line is too fucking long. I need to get out of here. Some of the other students started staring at us now. Jack realized this and turned around. You got a problem? He yelled at one of the girls behind us. The girl froze and grabbed her friend's hand. Dude, what the hell? Calm down, I yelled back. I had no idea why he was acting like this. It wasn't like him at all. Jack didn't say a word. Instead, he just turned to the door and ran out of the building. After that incident, I didn't talk to him. I did try to get his attention in class for a while, but it was no use. After a few days, I stopped trying altogether. After a week, Jack stopped showing up to class. One night I ran into Eliza in the hallway. I was done with classes for the day and was ready to head back to my apartment. Hey Eliza, I said with a smile. Oh hi Ethan, she said, smiling back. For some reason her smile sent a chill down my spine. Why did she seem so happy when her boyfriend was clearly not doing well? I adjusted my backpack before I spoke again. So what's up with Jack? Is he okay? Eliza looked up almost like she was thinking of the answer to a math problem. She turned back to me and answered cheerfully. He's wonderful, she said with a grin. He's actually better than ever. Oh, okay, I said, clearly unconvinced. Well, in that case, could you tell that... Better than ever, she interrupted. This startled me. I wasn't sure why, but something about this girl suddenly felt sinister. She walked away, leaving me standing there in my confusion. I snapped out of the weird trance I was in. This is stupid, I thought to myself. I'll just try calling again. I had called him before, and he stopped trying when I was convinced he wouldn't pick up. That night, I decided to call him up and ask if I could come over. To my surprise, he answered immediately. Yo, Jack answered. Hey man, what's up? I asked. What do you want? Is everything okay with you? You seemed off lately. Silence. Hello? Are you home? Yeah, what? I'm coming over. After Jack told me he was on his way, the call ended. I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty scared. The tone of the voice sounded panicked, almost like he was trying to get out of whatever situation he was in. About 45 minutes after the phone call, I hear a knock at my door. Hey, I said as I greeted Jack at the door. What's up? I tried to remain as calm as possible, but it was evident once I saw him that something was seriously wrong with the guy. I don't know, he whispered as his eyes darted back and forth. Are you alone? I nodded my head and let the poor guy in. He sat down on the couch I had set up in front of the TV. My roommates were out for the night, so I wasn't apprehensive about anyone coming back anytime soon. Dude, what's going on with... Turn off the lights. I froze for a moment. Jack, you're scaring me. What's... Turn off the lights! She can't find me. I did as I was told. This was turning out to be worse than I thought. Are you talking about Eliza? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Did she do something to you? Jack didn't answer. I put my hand on his shoulder. Dude, I want to help you, but there's nothing I can do if I don't know what's going on. Jack was violently tapping his fingers on his legs. He continued to stare at the ground as he answered me. There's something wrong with her, man. He whimpered. I think she's like part of a cult. I raised my eyebrows. I could tell he was scared, but this was a little much. Even still, she must have done something pretty messed up for Jack to think this way. Why do you say that? I asked. Also, have you asked anyone for help? If she's scaring you that badly, you know you can go to the police, right? I can't. He jerked his face to me and almost threw up. Jack was crying, but his tears were black. I thought I saw things at first, since the lights were off. But he confirmed my suspicions with what he said next. She did this to me. I don't know how, but I know it was her. He continued to cry, the black liquid staining the couch cushions like ink. The other night, she caught me crying these gross fucking tears and said that I was ready. What the fuck is that supposed to mean? I didn't know how to answer him. This is totally beyond my understanding, and I knew nothing I could say would give him any relief. We'll figure something out, I said after a minute of total silence. We should call the police. You should also go to the hospital. Whatever's going on with your eyes can't be good and needs to be looked at. Jack wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. She can't find me, he said, calming down a little. If she finds me, Jack fell silent as he heard a soft knock at my front door. "Jackie, I know you're in there." It was the girl's voice. "It's time to go. They're waiting for us. Your friend can come too if he wants to." Jack sprung up from the couch, ran towards the back door, and disappeared into the woods behind my apartment. "Jack, wait," I yelled. It was useless. I raced after my friend while dialing 911 on my cell. I told the police what was happening, and they assured me officers would be on their way as soon as possible. Before I could respond, something hit me over the head, and I blacked out. What happened next still seems like a horrible nightmare, but I know what I saw was real. When I eventually came to, I was tied to a tree trunk. Several figures were standing in a circle around another figure who was strapped to a chair. As my vision returned, I could see each figure was wearing a long black robe and a blue mask. I focused on the figure in the chair. It was Jack. I tried to scream, but my mouth was taped shut. I finally came to the horrid conclusion that I was not only present in the middle of a cult meeting, but I was about to witness a human sacrifice. One of the cultists walked toward Jack and lifted their mask. It was Eliza, grabbing his chin. She pulled his face close to hers and gave him a kiss. He pulled back and began swearing at the girl. I didn't blame him. I had a couple of things I wanted to say myself, but I couldn't due to my own restraints. Another taller cultist began to read from an old-looking black book. As he read, several other cultists swarmed Jack like hungry vultures. One cultist taped his mouth shut while the other two held down his chair. I watched in horror as the fourth cultist pulled out a rusty-looking tool. The cultist plunged the instrument in each of Jack's eyes, slowly tearing them out. The blood that rushed from his eye sockets appeared thick now, like tar. To finish it off, the cultist had taken Jack's eyes, fixed a blue mask to his face. He was still alive, but for how much longer I had no idea. As one cultist kept reading from the book, the ground beneath Jack began to tremble. Black tendrils sprouted up like demonic weeds. Some of the tendrils wrapped around his waist, others his ankles. One even plunged itself down his throat. I was beginning to pass out. Suddenly I heard sirens in the distance. This caused the cultist who was reading to stop. "What are you doing, you idiot?" one of the cultists screamed. "If you stop now, he'll..." The ground stopped shaking. The tendrils retreated back to wherever the hell they came from. Everyone went silent. The cultists seemed to freeze for a moment, almost looked like statues. The silence was soon broken by a faint, sinister laugh coming from Jack. "You made him mad," Jack hissed. These were the last words I ever heard my friend say. I watched him break free from my bonds like they were nothing. Jack charged each cultist, tearing them apart and splattering their entrails all over the frost-covered ground. My vision started to go, and the sounds of screaming cultists seemed to fade into the distance. I only wish I had totally passed out before hearing that horrible crunching, the sound of bones breaking and organs being devoured. My former friend was eating his captors, and I was sure I'd be next. I woke up to a police officer shining light in my face. "He's up, quick, we need a paramedic over here." I sat up and looked around. "I'm alive?" I mumbled, still in a haze. "I know you just went through some shit, kid, but is there anything you could tell us about what happened?" the officer asked. "Leave him alone," another officer ordered. "We can question him after we get him out of this hellhole. Kid's got a massive cut on his side." "Right, sorry, kid." I looked on and noticed my shirt was soaked in my own blood. I couldn't feel anything due to my current state, but I looked terrible. I didn't speak the entire way to the hospital. I didn't know what to say. Things got even worse when the doctor told me I was missing one of my kidneys while I would survive. It's been a little over a year now since this all went down. Everyone has already heard about it on the news, and the school came under some heavy fire for not noticing something this big happening near their campus. Jack Driscoll is still missing and still currently responsible for the murders of 10 students and the attempted murder of 1. I've gone on for long enough at this point. I guess I just really need to get it all out somehow. I still don't know what the cult was for, why it was formed, or what it was trying to summon. Obviously no one will look further because it sounds too ridiculous. But I'm hoping someone reading this will. If not, then I guess just be careful. You can't trust everyone after all. And that was You Can't Trust Everyone. Final thoughts? The title's true and the overall premise is true. You know, sometimes we trust people when they are trustworthy, and then they manage to turn on us later because something happens to corrupt them or otherwise. Maybe they get desperate for something that we could never know because they'd never tell us. All in all, I really liked how enjoyable this particular read was, and how it neither overstayed its welcome nor did it seem too short for the full read-through that it was. And with that, we turn to our next story, Ticci Toby. According to my paperwork here, let's see. Ticci Toby's going to be one of the longer ones here. Then we'll have Nina the Killer and yeah, I think Nina the Killer will finish us off tonight. No pun intended. Alright. Here it is. Always important when drinking alcohol to have something to chase it with that's not alcoholic. Keeps you from dehydrating or passing out. Alright, Ticci Toby. The long road home seemed to go on and on. The road continued to stretch in front of the vehicle endlessly. The light that shone through the branches of the tall green trees danced across the window in random patterns. Every once in a while, the light obnoxiously shining in your eyes. Let me see how the video is going. Oh wow, yeah, we're at the first half hour now. Good call on my part to split this up. The surroundings were full of deep green trees forming a forest around the road. The only sound was the sound of the car's engine as it traveled down the path. It was peaceful and left a serene feeling. Although the ride seemed like a nice one, it lacked every form of nice from its two passengers. Middle-aged woman behind the steering wheel had neat short brown hair that fit her complexion quite well. She wore a green V-neck t-shirt and a pair of blue jeans. Diamond-studded earrings decorated each of her ears, which partially showed from behind her haircut. She had deep green eyes, which her shirt brought out, and the lighting seemed to make them even more noticeable. There wasn't anything significant about her appearance. She looked like any other average mother you'd see on TV shows and the like. However, one thing that made her different than the average mother was the dark bangs that she had under her eyes. Her facial expression was gloomy, although she genuinely looked like someone who smiled a lot. She would sniffle periodically and occasionally glance in the rearview mirror to look at her son. Her son was hunched over partially with his arms held tight around his chest with his head pressed against the cold window. The boy lacked any normal appearance. Anyone could plainly see there was something wrong with him, yet his messy hair went every which way, and the luminescent lighting brought out his pale, almost gray skin. Unlike his mother's, his eyes were dark, and he wore a white t-shirt and scrub pants that had been provided to him by the hospital. The clothes he had worn before were so shredded and bloodstained that they weren't wearable anymore. The right side of his face bared a few cuts along with a split eyebrow. His right arm was bandaged all the way to the shoulder. It had been shredded when his right side hit the shattered glass. His injuries appeared to be painful when in reality he couldn't feel anything. This was just one of the glories of being him. One of the challenges he had to face when growing up was growing up with a rare disease that caused him to be utterly numb towards pain. Never before had he felt himself get hurt. That's actually a real disorder, by the way. Some people actually can't feel pain, which is problematic because then they don't feel any diseases they might get later on in life, and they don't go to the doctor, and that's how they die. So that's why a lot of, organizations now are trying to help these people learn to feel. You could have lost an arm and felt nothing. That's the other reason, You could lose a limb, feel nothing, and then you wouldn't feel the gangrene building up or anything. The other major disorder he faced, which was one that deemed him many insulting nicknames in the short time he attended grade school before switching to homeschooling, was his Tourette's syndrome. I actually knew a person with Tourette's syndrome, and he was the type that kind of swore incessantly and, made sounds at intervals. Even with medication, he couldn't really manage it that well, which caused him to tick and twitch in ways he couldn't control. He'd crack his neck uncontrollably and twitch every once in a while. The kids would tease him and call him Ticci Toby, and they mocked him with an exaggerated twitching and laughing. It got so bad he had to turn to his home school. It was too hard for him to be in a shared learning environment with seemingly every kid poking or more like stabbing fun at him. Toby stared blankly out the window, his face empty of any emotion, and every few minutes his shoulder, arm, foot would twitch. Every bump in the car tires hit would make his stomach turn. Toby Rogers was the boy's name. Last time Toby remembered riding in the car was when it crashed. So I thought about, unconsciously replaying everything he remembered before he blacked out, over and over again. Toby had been the lucky one. His sister had not been so fortunate. When the thought of his sister came, he couldn't help but feel the tears that welled up in his eyes. The horrible memories replayed in his mind. Her screaming had cut off when the front of the car was smashed in. It all went blank for a moment before Toby opened his eyes to see his sister's body. Her forehead pierced with glass shards, her hips and legs crushed under the force of the steering wheel, and her torso pushed in from the too late inflated airbag. That was the last thing he'd seen of his dear older sister. The road home continued on for what seemed like forever. It took so long to get home because his mom wanted to avoid the sight of the crash. When the surroundings gave way to a familiar neighborhood, they were both more than ready to get out of the car and step back into their own home. It was an older neighborhood with the quaint, tiny houses all next to each other. The car drove in front of the blue house, with white window panes. They both quickly noticed the old vehicle parked in front of the house, and the familiar figure in the driveway. Toby felt automatic anger and frustration take over him at the sight of his father. His father wasn't there. His mother pulled up the car to the driveway beside him before turning off the engine, preparing to step out and face her husband. "Why is he here?" Toby said quietly as he looked back at his mother, who reached to open the car door. "He's your father, Timmy. He's here because he wants to see you," his mother responded with a monotone voice, trying to sound less shaky. "Yet you couldn't drive up to the hospital to see Lyra before she died." Toby narrowed his eyes out the window. "He was drunk that night, honey. He couldn't drive." "Yeah, and when he's not..." Toby pushed the door open before his mother and stumbled out the driveway, where he met his father's gaze before looking down at his feet with a stern expression. His mother stepped out behind him and met her husband's eyes before walking around the car. His father opened up his arms, expecting a hug from his wife, but she walked past him and put her arm around Toby's shoulder and started leading him inside. "Connie," her husband began in a raspy voice. "What, no welcome home hug, huh?" She ignored her husband's obnoxious words and walked past him with her son under her arm. "Hey, he's 16. He can walk by himself." His father began to follow them in. "He's 17. Connie glared back at him before opening the door to the house and stepping inside. "Toby, why don't you get in your room to rest, okay? I'll come contact you when dinner's ready." "No, I'm 16. I can walk by myself," Toby said sarcastically and glared back at his father before stumbling up the small staircase and turning into his room, where he slammed the door violently. His little room didn't have much in it, just a small bed, a dresser, a window, and walls, and a few picture frames of his family. Back when they were a family, before his father became an alcoholic and acted violently towards the rest of his family. Toby remembered when he was arguing with his mom and he grabbed her by the hair and shoved her to the floor. When Lyra tried to break it up, he pushed her and hit her on the back counter of the kitchen counter. Toby could never forgive him for what he did to his mother and sister. Never. Toby didn't care about how much his father beat him down. He couldn't feel it anyway. What he did care about was intentionally hurting the only two people he cared about. And when he was waiting in the hospital where his sister took her last breaths, the only one who didn't rush there was his dad. Toby stood by the window and looked out at the street. He could have sworn he saw something out the corner of his eye, but quickly blamed it on the meds he was on. When the dinner time had come, he and his mother called up to him. Toby went down the stairs and hesitantly sat at the table. He was across his father and between his mother and an empty chair. It was quiet as his parents picked up their food, but Toby refused to eat. Instead, he just watched his dad with a blank stare. His mother caught on to his staring and elbowed him slightly. Toby looked over at her barely, and then down at his uneaten food, which he still didn't touch. Toby laid in bed, then he pulled the covers over his head and stared at the window. He was tired, but there was no way he'd fall asleep. Toby couldn't. There was too much to think about. He had been debating on whether or not to follow his mother's directions and to forgive his father, or to continue holding a grudge with his boiling hatred. He heard his door creak open and his mother padded to the room and sat on the bed next to him. She reached over and rubbed his back, which had been turned to her. "I know it's hard, Toby. Trust me. I understand, but I promise you it'll only get better," she said softly. "Then when is he going to leave?" Toby said with an innocent tone in his shaky voice. Honey let her gaze fall down to her feet. "I don't know, honey. He's staying as far as I know," she replied. Toby didn't respond. He just continued to look at the wall, holding his damaged arm near his chest. After a few minutes of silence, his mother sighed before she leaned in to kiss his cheek, then stood up to walk out of the room. "Good night," she said as she closed the door. The hours passed slowly, and Toby couldn't quit tossing and turning. Every time he let his imagination take over, he heard screeching of tires, the screaming of his sister. He would uncontrollably jerk in bed. Toby threw off his cover and, lying on his back, pulled the pillow over his face and cried into it. He couldn't hear his own pitiful weeping. He would have been screaming and crying if he didn't press his pillow over his face. After a few seconds, he threw a pillow off his face and sat up, hunched over, holding his head and breathing roughly. Tears streaming down from his eyes, he couldn't help but cry. He tried to keep it in, but he couldn't stop the whining and whimpering as he sat there shaking. He inhaled before he stood up and walked around his bed to the window and peered out, taking deep breaths, trying to calm down. He rubbed his eyes and looked at the group of tall pine trees across the street. He stopped suddenly, and his gaze slowly centered on something standing under the streetlight. He heard ringing in his ears and couldn't look away. The figure stood beside the streetlight, about 2 feet shorter than it did. Long arms draped at its sides, as it stared up at him with non-existing eyes. The figure had no facial features to speak of, no eyes, no mouth, no nose. Yet it held Toby's hypnotized stare, seemingly peering into his very being. The ringing in his ears grew louder and louder each second he stared, before suddenly it all went black. The following day, Toby woke in his bed. He felt different. Toby wasn't tired at all. When Toby consciously woke up, it felt like Toby had been lying there awake for hours. He had no thoughts flowing through his mind. Toby sat up slowly and stumbled over the wall, but Toby automatically felt dizzy when standing there. He stumbled to the doorway and walked down the stairs. Toby's parents were at the table. His father was tuned into the small TV that sat on the countertop, and his mother was reading the newspaper. She quickly looked over when she felt Toby's presence looming behind her. "Well, good morning, sleepyhead. You've been sleeping forever," she greeted him with a hesitant smile. Toby looked over at the clock and noticed it was 12:30 p.m. "I made you breakfast, but it got cold. I was going to wake you, but I felt you needed sleep." Her expression fell from happy to worried as her son resisted responding to her. "Are you all right?" Toby stumbled over and sat by his father. He felt as if he was idle and had no control over his actions. Toby saw everything, but it didn't register in his brain correctly. He reached out to his father's arm, but his hand ended up getting slapped. His father turned to him abruptly and pushed his chair over with his foot. "Don't touch me, boy," he yelled. His mother stood up. "All right, knock that off. This is the last thing we need." Days went by and things continued as they were. Connie spent most of her time cleaning the house, and her rude husband spent most of his time ordering her around. It was just like how it used to be before the crash. Toby never really left his room. He would sit by his bed and tremble. His mind would wander, but his thoughts changed too fast to be remembered. He'd pace around his small room like a caged animal or stare out the window. The unhealthy cycle continued. Connie continued to be pushed around by her husband, being way too submissive to him. Toby remained in his room. Before he could think twice, he'd begin to chew on his hands, tearing the flesh from his fingers. He gnawed his hands until they bled. When his mother walked in on him while he was doing so, she reacted horribly. She rushed him downstairs and grabbed the first aid kit, wrapping his hands in bandages. Afterwards, she demanded that he wouldn't leave her side again. Toby isolated himself so much he grew to hate being around others. His memory grew glitchy as well. He started missing memory of minutes, hours, days, and so on. He'd begin talking nonsense about things utterly unrelated to conversations he would have. He'd go off about seeing things, sharks in the sink as he washed dishes, hearing crickets in the pillows, and seeing ghosts outside his bedroom window. His mother grew so anxious about his mental health she decided it would be good for him to talk to a professional about his feelings. Connie walked Toby into the building, holding his hand and guiding him in. She walked up to the front desk and began talking to the lady who sat behind it. "Miss Rogers?" Probably no relation to that iconic guy that used to have like the neighborhood back in my day. Yeah, he died when I was like a teenager, I think. Yes, that's me, Connie nodded. We're here to see Dr. Oliver. I'm here with Toby Rogers? Yes, right this way. The lady stood and sat and led him down a long hallway. Toby looked at the framed artwork down the halls and tuned into the sound of the lady's high heels on the hardwood floor. She opened the door to a room with a table and 2 chairs. If we can get him to sit here for a few minutes, I'll get the doctor. She smiled and held the door open. Toby stumbled into the room and sat down at the table. He looked over at his mother and the lady before the door slowly shut behind them. He looked around the room before he held his head up. Held up his tightly bandaged hands and began to bite at the bandages to unwrap his hands, but he was interrupted as the doctor swung open and a young woman in a black and spotted dress with a light blonde hair stepped in, holding a clipboard and pen. "Toby?" she asked with a smile. Toby looked up at her and nodded. "Nice to meet you, Toby. My name is Dr. Oliver." She put her hand out for him to shake, but he hesitantly pulled away when she noticed his bandaged hands. "Oh," she smiled nervously before clearing her throat and sitting on the chair across the table from him. "So I'm going to ask you a few questions. Try to answer them as honestly as possible, okay?" She placed her clipboard down on the table. Toby nodded slowly and held his restrained hands on his lap. "How old are you, Toby?" 17, he responded quietly. She wrote that down on the paper that was clipped to the clipboard. "What's your full name?" "Toby Aaron Rogers." "When is your birthday?" "April 28th. "Who is your immediate family?" Toby paused for a moment before answering her question. "My mom and dad," and he stopped. "My sister." "I heard about your sister, dear. I'm really sorry." Her expression faded into a sad, pity-filled look. Toby nodded. "Do you remember anything from the crash, Toby?" Toby looked away from her. His mind went blank for a moment. He looked down at his lap in the surrounding area. He heard a faint ringing sound. His eyes widened and he froze in place. "Toby?" the counselor asked. "Toby, are you listening?" Toby felt a shiver go down his spine until he froze again and slowly looked over out the tiny window through the door where he saw it, a dark, featureless figure peering in at him. He stared, eyes widened, the ringing growing louder and louder until suddenly the loud voice of the counselor broke his trance. "Toby!" she yelled. Toby jumped and fell sideways out of his chair and backed up into the corner. Dr. Oliver stood up, holding her clipboard at her chest, a surprised look in her face. Toby met her eyes again, his breath hitching as he twitched. At night, Toby lay in bed. His eyes were dazed as he stared straight up at his ceiling. Toby could feel himself begin to doze off when Toby heard scattering of footsteps down his hallway. He sat up and looked towards the doorway, his door wide open. There was no light. Everything was lit by the luminescent blue glow of the moon through his window, leaving cold lighting. He stood up and slowly made his way towards the doorway, and suddenly the door, which previously was wide open, slammed in his face. He gasped and fell back. He was out of breath when he hit the ground. Toby began breathing heavily, his eyes wide open. He waited for a few seconds before getting back on his feet. Toby reached out and grasped the cold door handle with his bandaged hand, and it creaked open. He looked out into the dark hallway and tiptoed out of his room. The window at the end of the hallway lit up the darkness with blue moonlight as Toby padded his way down. He heard footsteps and rustling around him, and faint giggling followed by the pitter-patter of tiny feet, which sounded like a child had run in front of him. Giggling and running around the hallway was a lot longer than he remembered. It seemed endless, like the ride home from the hospital. He heard the door creak in front of him. "Mom?" he called in a shaky voice. Suddenly a door slammed behind him. He jumped and turned around. Behind him he heard a long eerie groan that sounded like a croak right in his ear. He turned around as fast as possible and was suddenly face to face with none other than his dead sister. Her eyes clouded white, skin pale, the right side of her jaw dangling there by the tissue and muscle. Glass protruding from her forehead, black blood leaking down her face, her blonde hair pulled up in a ponytail as it always was. She was wearing her gray t-shirt and athlete shorts, which were dirty and spotted with blood. Her legs were bent in ways which they shouldn't be. She stood emitting a long croaking noise only an inch or two from Toby's face. Toby yelped and fell back. "Ah!" He started to crawl backward from her, but he could not break eye contact he held with her blank, dead eyes. He dragged himself backward until he backed up into something. He stopped for a second. Everything was dead silent except for his heavy breathing and crying. He slowly looked up to meet the blank face of a tall, dark figure, the exact figure that stood over him now. Behind the elevated dark mass were rows of children looking to range from 3 to 10 years old, their eyes completely black, and dark black blood leaked from their eye sockets. He screamed and stood up as fast as he could, only to be tripped by dark black tendrils wrapped around his ankle. He fell straight on his stomach and got the wind knocked out of him. He tried to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. He wheezed out before it all went black. Toby woke with a start. He screamed out and sat up as fast as he could, completely short of breath. He wheezed out and held his chest with his bandaged hands. It was just a dream. Just a dream. He lay back down on his bed and rolled over on his side. It felt like against weight. It had been lifted off his chest, and he took in deep breaths. He stood up and padded over to his window and saw nothing. Nobody was there. No ghosts, no figures, nothing. He heard a rustling and coughing of his father outside the doorway. His door was closed. He walked over and opened it, looking into the hallway. He padded down the hallway into the kitchen, where he found his dad standing and having a smoke in their living room. Toby waited for a second and watched him from around the corner before a burning feeling started deep in his chest. Deep boiling anger overtook him. He heard the little imaginary voices in his head. "Do it! Do it! Do it!" they chanted. He turned away and held his arms. He felt like he actually had control over himself, unlike the past few weeks since he got home from the hospital. He actually had complete thoughts for just moments before chanting little voices in his head clouded them. "Kill him! He wasn't there! He wasn't there! Kill him! Kill him!" They continued on. Toby trembled. No, he wasn't going to do it. What was he, going crazy? No, he won't kill anyone. He can't. He hated his father, but there's no way he was going to kill him. That was it. The last thought he had before he fell into an idle state once again. The influence of the voices in his head was too much. He began to silently walk up behind his father. He reached over the counter with a knife in the case. He gripped it with his hand and felt a sensation take over his chest and let out a snicker. He began laughing so hard he had to gasp for breath. His father turned around abruptly before he felt a brute force shove him to the floor. He grunted as the air was knocked out of him. "What?" He looked up at the boy who stood over him, gasping with the kitchen knife in his hand. "Toby, what are you doing?" He went to sit up and put his arms out in front of him in self-defense, but before he knew it, Toby was on top of him and went to grab his neck, but his father reached out and blocked the hand by holding onto his wrist. "Stop! Get off me, you little fucker!" He yelled in his other hand. He threw an off-center punch toward Toby's shoulder, but he didn't stop. The look in Toby's eyes was not sane. It looked as if a demon had taken control of him. He yelled back and went to stab the knife into his father's chest, but his father blocked him and grabbed onto his wrist once again. He shoved him back, but Toby kicked his feet out in front of him and landed a hard blow straight on the father's face. His father recoiled and pulled his arms away to cuff his face, but Toby got back up and drove the knife straight into his shoulder. His father let out a loud cry and went back to pull the knife out. But before he could, Toby threw his fist straight into his face. He began to pound his fists into his head, laughing and wheezing. He cracked his neck and grabbed the knife and ripped it out of his father's shoulder. He drove it deep into his dad's chest and repeatedly stabbed it in his torso, blood spilling out and getting splattered everywhere. He didn't stop until his father's body went still. He threw the knife over to the side and leaned over his body, coughing and panting. He stared at his father's smashed-in face and sat there twitching until a loud scream broke the silence. He looked over to see his mother standing a few feet away, covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Toby!" she screamed. "Why did you do that?" she cried. "Why?" she screamed. Toby stood up and began to back away from his father's bloody corpse. He began to back out of the kitchen. Toby looked down at the blood-soaked bandages on the hands and looked up at his mother one last time before turning to run out of the house. He ran to the garage and slammed his head against the control panel on the wall. He pushed the button to open the garage door. Before he ran out, he noticed his father's hatchets, which had been hanging on the tool rack above the table, full of jars filled to the brim with old rusted nails and screws. One of the hatchets was new. It had a bright orange handle and a shiny blade. The other was an old with a wooden handle and an old dull knife. He grabbed both and looked down at the table and saw a box of matches, and under the table was a red gasoline tank. He held the hatchets in each hand and grabbed 2 matches and gasoline. Toby ran out of the garage, down the driveway, and up the street. As he approached the streetlight to see his own bedroom window, he heard police sirens in the distance. He turned around and the red and blue flashing lights came rushing down the street. Toby stood for a second before he pulled open the cap on the gasoline tank and ran down the road, spilling gasoline all over the street after him. He turned and ran into the trees. Toby poured the last bit of gas up before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a match. He struck it against the box and immediately dropped it. Instant flames burst around him. The fire caught on the trees and the bushes around him. Before he knew it, he was surrounded by fire. Silhouettes of police cars were visible through the flames as he backed away into the forest around him. He looked around, but vision was blurred. His heart was pounding. He closed his eyes for a moment. This was it. This was the end. Toby felt a hand on his shoulder. He opened his eyes and looked over to see it was a large white hand with long bony fingers resting atop his shoulder. He followed the arm that was attached to the hand up to a dark, towering figure. It appeared to be wearing a dark black suit, his face completely blank. It towered over Toby's small frame as it looked down at him. Tendrils reached from its back. Before Toby knew it, his vision blurred. He heard the sounds of ringing in his ears. Everything went black. This was it. That was how Toby Rogers died. A few weeks later, Connie sat in her sister's kitchen. His sister, Lori, sat next to her drinking a cup of coffee. About 3 weeks ago, Connie lost her husband and her son. A few weeks before, she lost her daughter to a car crash. Since then, she moved in with her sister. The police were keeping her busy. They had just finished cleaning up the case, and the story had been released 2 weeks ago. The focus of the world seemed to have shifted to entirely new accounts. Lori switched on the TV to a news broadcast. On the TV, the reporter began announcing the new headline. "We have breaking news. Last night there have been reports of the murder of 4 individuals. There are no suspects yet, but the victims were a group of middle school kids who had been out in the woods late last night. Kids have been bludgeoned and stabbed to death. The investigators discovered a weapon at the crime scene. It appears to be an old dull blade hatchet, as you can see here. Picture changed to show snapshots of the weapon exactly as it was left at the crime scene. Investigators have pulled up the name of the possible suspect. Toby Rogers, the 17-year-old boy who stabbed his father to death a few weeks ago and tried to cover up his escape by setting fire in the streets in the forest area around his neighborhood. Although they believe the young boy had died in a fire, investigators suspect Rogers may still be alive since his body was never found." And here I thought maybe he had been taken away by Slender Man or something. But who knows, that could be a sister that was following him the whole time. Anyway, that was Ticci Toby. Final thoughts? Really long, but really good story for what it's worth. Although it's it's rare for someone to have two severe illnesses like that. It's, you know, Tourette's and, you know, that being unable to feel one. At the same time, I know someone with 22q, so it's highly possible for one to have multiple comorbid conditions at once. So, not entirely outside the realm of possibility, still. If anything, it should serve as a warning that maybe you don't want to tick off someone who's got any kind of obvious disability, or anyone at all for that matter, but especially not those. There's been enough incidents regarding body counts because people couldn't just leave people alone who were otherwise vulnerable. So, yeah. Don't bully the disabled. It's not cool. And it won't end well for anybody. And, alright. And now for our last story of the night. I think it's the last story, yeah. Nina the Killer. Yes, another Jeff the Killer knockoff. Well, okay. Speaking from the guy who kind of wrote a character whose name is based on it, but, you know, has a whole nother story behind it, maybe. You know. Yeah. Anyway, and this was written anonymously, so we don't know who the heck made this one. I heard recently there was a new killer. I was surprised when I heard it for the first time, but I first thought it was just a crazy fan of Jeff the Killer because of her appearance. And yeah, apparently it's... When I was editing this, I noticed that, oh, Jeff the Killer does make a cameo here. Totally not fan fiction. But after a thorough investigation of her, I discovered it was worse than a monster. Things didn't go well after that. I read it from a local newspaper. Strange and unexplained murders have increased for several months. They've investigated the suspect as a killer. Investigators found a witness who said it was not only one killer, but two killers. He said both of them are attacking different cities. It's still not unknown if they work together or separately, but luckily I found another witness from the hospital. He told me what happened. Here's what the witness said. It happened one night, the guy narrated. I was walking from my work to home, and I was alone in the streets. Then I decided to take a shortcut because I wanted to get home quickly. But it was a big mistake. When I was already halfway to my home, I began to feel I was being watched, and I heard footsteps. I quickly made sure that the thief was not following me, but I found nothing. So I just thought it was just my imagination. I continued walking, but the feeling of being watched became more potent, and I heard footsteps close. I noticed something approaching, then suddenly I saw a black-haired girl with a magenta streak in her hair. She looks like she's 16 or 17, though her face did not look like a human. Her skin was ashen, and her eyes looked at me with a thirst for blood. She had extensive eyes with a strange, disturbing look. Her smile was so dark, and I was afraid. I stood still for a moment. I felt a great fear running through my body. She didn't say any words, she just stood there for what seemed like eternity. And finally the girl just gave a speech as she moved her head to one side in the way the psychopath could do. I immediately got nervous. I felt nervous. Let's see how we do. Okay. Alright. Go to sleep, my prince. Then I quickly ran to the opposite direction. I ran as fast as I can, but it was not enough. Then I suddenly felt her dark presence, followed by a sharp stab through my arm. I fell to the ground with a groan of pain. Then she released a hysterical laugh. She used her knife and she stabbed it into my shoulder. She managed to slice off my shirt, making my stomach bleeding. But luckily I hear the voice of the policeman who'd come. She was holding a gun. But the girl just smiled at it, and the police fired several bullets in her direction, but the girl avoided it rapidly and dashed while laughing. I saw her climbing one of the houses and she disappeared. I was never able to forget that face, let alone that laugh. After my interview with him, the young man was found dead in his house. His body was chopped into pieces. It was full of blood everywhere. In the room where the body was found, on the wall was found written with blood that said, "You didn't go to sleep, my prince." The origin of Nina the killer. Nina Hopkins is an 11-year-old who transferred from a new school to be closer to her home. One Sunday morning, a day before her first day of the new school, she woke up and went to the bathroom to brush her teeth. She went back to her bed and took her laptop to connect to the Wi-Fi. Nina was not a very cheerful type of girl. She was not the type of girl who would open the window, let the light into her room, and do something productive. No, Nina enjoyed sitting down to watch animes or listen to music like rock, J-pop, or K-pop, playing video games, or just play guitar. So she liked to be herself and loved her family and friends. But this time, she did not want to do any of the things that are considered normal. This time, she wanted to read Jeff the Killer creepypasta for the 1000th time. She adored him. It was her favorite. She felt a strange attraction to him. She had an admiration for him more than anything. She felt a peculiar desire every time she'd read it, but Nina didn't know why she enjoyed the strange desire. When she started to read it, the door suddenly opened. She quickly saw her little brother Chris with his beautiful green eyes. Nina thinks Chris is her prince. She loved calling her little brother Prince because when she was younger, her mother would always tell her fairy tales when it's bedtime. She liked this type of story, and she thinks the princes in the fairy tales look like her little brother Chris. Chris has dark black hair, fair skin, and light green eyes, like his late father. However, Nina has blonde, brown hair, fair skin, and watery blue eyes, like her mother. "Sis, it's time to eat," said the child with an innocent smile. "I'm going, my prince." She pinched the cheeks of her little brother. She left my laptop on the bed and went to eat. The following day, Nina and Chris went to school. Nina got up and dressed in a shirt that is her favorite, and she took her bag. She felt something strange, like a strange desire. An odd little smile formed on her mouth. Suddenly she heard her mother's voice, and she was in reality again. She immediately took the bag and completely ignored what happened. She went downstairs. "Are you both ready for school?" asked the mother. "Yes," they both responded. "Well, good luck in school," and her mother went back to the kitchen. "Bye, Mom," they both responded. They walk to school because Nina thinks taking a bus is annoying. They both went their separate ways. Nina went to the high school while her little brother went to the elementary school. Nina didn't really like attending classes because she thinks it's boring. When the siblings finished taking classes, they both decided to find a quiet place to eat without worrying that students are playing around them. So she found a garden behind the school where there were no people, teachers, or even students. They sat and eat, thinking they would have a peaceful breakfast, but they heard footsteps. Nina looked up and met a girl much older than her. She had black hair. "Well, well, what have we here? New students," announced the girl. "My name's Claudia, and I rule this school. If you do not obey what I say, you will suffer," she said as she pulled a knife from her jeans. Suddenly, the two guys came out from a nearby tree. They were known as Malcolm and Yoni. Nina sat up quickly and stood in front of Chris to protect him. "We don't want any trouble, we just want a peaceful breakfast," Nina clarified. "Ah, I see, but you shouldn't be here. This area is ours," Claudia said as she approached them. "That's stupid, you have no right to make us go away from here," said Chris while confronting Claudia, but Yoni punched him in the stomach. Chris collapsed, but Nina quickly held him. "Chris," said Nina while holding him in her arms. "Well, if you don't want to be next, I recommend you obey and get out of here," claimed Claudia while pointing Nina's face with a knife. Nina did nothing but punch Claudia's face. Claudia collapsed to the ground. Nina took Claudia's knife and stabbed her shoulder. Then Nina gave a strong kick to the crotch of Malcolm. He quickly fell down to the ground, but Nina didn't stop. She promptly released several kicks to the boy's face. His face was now full of wounds and blisters. He had a nosebleed. He became frightened, and immediately when he saw how Nina attacked Claudia and Malcolm, started to run away from her, but Nina immediately noticed it and quickly ran to him. She used Claudia's knife and promptly lunged at the boy, targeting his stomach. "Nina," she heard a voice of her little brother. Nina immediately turned to him and got confused as to why His little brother had a shocked look on his face, and he decided to let Yoni go and stepped back. She looked at her bloodstained hands. She felt like a monster, but had to admit that her killer's side was excellent. She turned back to her brother. Her brother was surprised at what he saw. He was shocked at what he saw. Nina ran to him and took his arm. "Come on, we can't be here for long," I said. Then we left the garden. After that, Nina went to wash her hands. She knew she must avoid telling somebody or ever mentioning what happened. Little brother Chris thought it was just self-defense, but he knew something else was going on in there. She knew that there was something more substantial and horrible starting to form inside her, that feeling of being powerful, that need to hurt someone. The day passed quickly, and when the siblings returned, they sat down to eat with their mother. "Well, how's school?" asked his mother with a sweet smile. Chris stayed quiet and didn't answer the question. "Great," Nina commented with a psychotic smile. Nina went upstairs after eating and opened her closet, revealing her collection of Jeff the Killer. Nina had several Jeff posters, clothing, notebooks, dolls, and stuffed animals. "Merchandising much?" She took a doll from her closet and put it in her bed. Looking at it, Nina couldn't tell if the doll's sinister smile intimidated her or amused her. Then she whispered, "Jeff, you made me do this." After the incident, Malcolm and Claudia were found unconscious, but they didn't locate the culprit. They also had no idea that Nina was the one who did it. An 11-year-old, so she had that advantage to avoid suspicion, and since it happened to be the first day of school, many couldn't tell if Nina was there because many people didn't know much about new students and it didn't gain much attention. Also, many students didn't know whether it happened on the first day of school or not. One day, Nina opened her locker and she found a note which said, "I know what you did, but don't worry. I will not tell anyone. You're very skillful, but also very dangerous." Nina didn't find the signature or anything to identify who wrote the note. But she knew that someone saw her and decided not to reveal his name. Meanwhile, Nina's sanity didn't improve, and she took a knife in the kitchen and hid it in her pocket while sleeping in the room with her brother and mother. When Chris was playing with his new friends in the park, Nina's mother, whose name is Monica, noticed that it was getting dark. So she asked her daughter to tell her brother that they're going home now. Nina went to look for her brother but didn't see her little him. She became worried, so she went over to Chris's friends and she asked them where her little brother was. They responded that a black-haired girl took him. Nina became very worried and went home to take the knife in her room that she hid so her mother wouldn't find out about it. Nina spent a lot of time finding him. She was getting desperate and she hoped her little brother was in a safe place. She then saw a car coming. When the door of the car was opened, she saw something that was thrown away in the ground. She was surprised when it was Chris who was on the floor, but she heard laughter coming from the car before the car went away. She quickly held Chris in her arms. Her little brother was brutally beaten and his clothes were ripped apart. "Chris, what happened?" she exclaimed, holding the small body of her brother. "Eat them, Nina, me to play," said Chris while trying to speak to Nina, and tried to control something that was screaming inside over and over again. She felt she needed to control her anger. Nina quickly took him to the hospital. Nina called her mother and informed her what happened to Chris. Her mother quickly went to the hospital. The doctor told him that he has internal bleeding and swollen wounds were found in his body. The mother of Nina began to cry, but Nina just kept quiet about the situation. She wanted to avoid hurting someone just for revenge. The next day, Chris was released from the hospital, but the doctor told him to rest for 3 weeks. Nina didn't go to school because she wanted to take care of her little brother. She would tell Chris some stories that would help him by making sure he would take some medications. Nina went to school again. She received a new note which read, "I'm sorry about your brother. I hope he recovers. You must never think you're alone. I'm here. I'll be your friend." Nina suddenly blushed after reading it. She rechecks the letter. She didn't find a signature. Weeks had passed when the arrival of the school's picture day arrived. Can you guess who's sending her these notes? Well, I'm not going to spoil it for you. We'll read on. Nina was ready for the picture day. She She wore a short black skirt, black stockings with deep red stripes, and a sleeveless t-shirt with black and blue stripes, and a bloody red ribbon in her long ponytail hair. But felt that something was missing, and looks in her closet. She sees her favorite purple hoodie, which reminded her of Jeff the Killer's hoodie, so she put it on. She went downstairs and sees her little brother waiting on the stairs. They both left the house and said goodbye to their mother. The siblings went to school, but this time they went to the bus to avoid meeting the trio on the road. When they arrived at school, they saw the trio. Claudia, Malcolm, and Yoni are walking in the hallway. They seemed to be searching for someone, but Nina was aware the trio was searching for her and her brother Chris. Siblings decided to stay away from the hallway and must avoid being seen by them. The day passed quickly, but unfortunately the trio found them. Nina felt she had been followed. When she turned to face her back, she received a face punch and she fell to the ground. Then Nina saw her brother, who was caught in the arms of Malcolm. Nina tried to get back up, but she received another punch in the belly. She fell back to the ground and looked up. She saw Claudia. "At last I have found you, bitch," said Claudia while standing in front of Nina. "This is my revenge for attacking me last time," she said while pulling a gun. "I don't want to fight you," Nina said while trying to stand up. Claudia immediately shot Nina using her gun. But Nina quickly reacted to it and avoided the bullet. Nina stood up and ran as fast as she could to an abandoned house nearby. It was locked inside, so she climbed up the stairs. The trio tried to shoot her with many bullets, but they couldn't successfully hit her. Nina went up inside the bathroom and she was trapped there. She wanted something to defend her. "Nina, are you going to stay there? Did you forget what I did to your little brother, you idiot?" Claudia shouted from outside the abandoned house. Nina suddenly felt a combination of hatred and anger and just the need to kill someone. Nina looked around the room, saw an iron rod, and a twisted smile formed on her face. She took the iron rod and left the room. She quickly dodged the bullets and hit Yoni through the head, releasing a stream of blood. Some of the blood went on Nina's face. There, something had changed in her. Something broke. Like a thin thread had broken, a thread that divides sanity from insanity. Malcolm and Claudia took a few steps back. Nina turned in their direction, showing a psychotic smile, making Chris shiver with fear. Claudia tried to run along with Malcolm, but Nina hit Claudia in the head. She fell down and Malcolm released Chris from his hands, but Nina didn't stop the violence. She attacked Malcolm in the head a ton of times, making his head full of crimson blood. Claudia tried to get her gun from the ground, but Nina prevented her. Nina pointed her iron rod to Claudia. "Nina, do you feel good?" Chris said as he felt afraid of his big sister. He turned to face him with a little more relaxed look, but she didn't stop smiling. "Do I feel good? I feel great, my prince. Let's go home," Nina said to her little brother. Nina and Chris returned home. Her mother saw Nina full of blood, so she quickly went to her room. Nina grabbed her laptop and wrote a note, a message that perhaps no one will ever read. It was midnight. The mother of Nina and her brother was sleeping. However, Nina could not sleep, so she got up. She looked in the mirror and smiled in a twisted way. She went downstairs and she was ready to do the craziest thing in her life. Nina walked to the kitchen. She drank a bottle of vodka and put it on the table. She then started to search for a bottle of bleach in the cabinets. But she didn't find any bleach. "Where's the bleach?" Nina groaned as she looked for it. Are you looking for these?" Nina heard a voice behind her. She turned around and she was surprised to find a guy in the kitchen entrance. He was holding a bottle of bleach. The boy had ashen skin, his hair was black, and had a disturbing smile. "Guess who?" "Ah, you're Jeff the Killer," Nina said. "I've been observing you for a while. I think you've become a killer like me." Jeff said. "You're right, so I need that bottle of bleach," Nina said. "Oh, let me help you," Jeff said as he opened the bottle and poured the bleach onto Nina's head. Nina felt another liquid running through her head. She looked up and saw Jeff had a matchbox in his hands. Nina smiled at him. "What are you waiting for? Do it," Nina said with a passion. Jeff grinned and threw the burning match on her face. "Go to sleep," Jeff said as Nina's face began to catch on fire. Flames started to spread around Nina's face. She screamed loudly. It was excruciating for her. She looks around, but Jeff disappeared. Nina collapsed on the floor, and she saw her mother and brother quickly going downstairs. Both of them immediately used a bucket of water to put out the fire. When the fire was on her face was gone, her mother called the ambulance, but many neighbors came to their house since they heard Nina scream. Nina fell unconscious when they put her on a stretcher. She took to the ambulance. Among the neighbors, a boy with black hair, pale skin, and green eyes. His height slightly higher than Nina. The boy looked at her with some concern, but he didn't know how to help her. The boy watched as they put Nina in the ambulance. Nina woke up after being unconscious in the ambulance. She tried to move on her own, but the bandages prevented her from moving. Suddenly, a nurse came with her mother and her little brother. "It will be better if you stay still. You shouldn't move around," said the nurse. Her mother and little brother came to her and encouraged her that it's going to be okay. After a month of recovery in the hospital, the doctor decided to take off the bandages on her head. Her mother and her little brother were anxious to see her face, but luckily, her face was kept intact and not entirely damaged. "Well, Miss Nina, the burns were not severe. You still had most of your facial structures, including your nose. But if the fire in your face kept burning, your face would suffer great damage," the doctor said while removing the last bandage from her face. When the previous bandage was finally released, Nina's mother was terrified at what she saw, while her little brother was hiding behind her mother. What is it?" Nina said while she was getting up from her hospital bed. She ran towards the bathroom and observed herself in the mirror. Her face was very different from before. Her skin had turned completely white. Her hair used to reach on her knees, but now it's on her back. Her skin was very soft, like a marshmallow, but her family was shocked at her new face. "Sister," Chris said while hugging Nina. "You still look as beautiful as before," Chris said. But the child knew that he lied to his big sister because he actually felt afraid of her sister's disturbing face. "Oh, Chris, you're so nice," Nina said while looking at him in that way, in a most disturbing way. "But I want to be more beautiful," Nina shouted. Nina's strange behavior confused her mother, then her little brother, and it also made the doctor confused with the girl's behavior. "This face is perfect. Oh, my dear Jeff, you gave me this beautiful face," the girl continued shouting. "The doctor, is my daughter okay?" Nina's mother asked the doctor. "Well, usually things go well after a lot of rest, but if her mental health doesn't improve, I'll give her psychotherapy," the doctor said. "I understand," Nina's mother said. Nina's mother grabbed Chris's arm. "We have to go now," Nina's mother said. Sure," Nina said while looking at her face in the mirror. Chris handed her clothes, which is her purple hoodie with the short black skirt and black stockings with deep red stripes. Nina dressed up and left the hospital. She went home with her family. She doesn't know that she had become a monster that will kill anyone. They came to the house and Nina keeps smiling disturbingly. Then she notices a boy in one of the windows of the house. He had black hair and green eyes. The boy was watching her, but he quickly disappeared. That night, Nina's mother woke up after hearing the sobbing of a girl. Her mother gets up from her bed and she wanted to find the source of the loud noises she heard. She crept and saw the door of her daughter's room was open. She went inside of the room and the room was very dark. She turned on the lights, then Nina's mother saw something terrible in her daughter's room. Nina keeps stabbing a lifeless body of a girl. She keeps stabbing her with a kitchen knife while smiling. Her intestines and internal organs were removed and Nina put them on her bed. Her entire clothes were stained with blood. She stared at the ceiling. "She used to bully me at school," Nina said. She kept staring her eyes at the ceiling. "Mommy, I'm becoming more beautiful," she exclaimed as she turns her head to her mother. Her face was horrible. Her smile was shocking and her eyes were very wide open. "I get tired of being worried. I get tired of being sad and suffer all the time. Now I'll smile always and people will see my beautiful face. This is the face that Jeff gave me. Am I beautiful, Mama?" Nina asked her mother. Nina's mother could not help but take a few steps back, shaking her head. "No, Nina, you've become a monster. You've killed someone." Nina's mother started running. Nina quickly followed her mother. "Killing people when they run is funny," Nina said as she followed her mother. Nina's mother tried to run to Chris's room to wake him up, but when she was just about to touch the knob of the door to his room, quickly stabbed his mother's skull with a knife, and her mother immediately fell to the ground. I'm very kind of sad that Mom does not believe I'm beautiful. How sad. Nina said while pulling the knife out of her mother's head. Chris woke up in his room and he felt he was in danger, and he was scared. Nina slowly opened the door, revealing her shadow, and Chris realized it's his sister. He took his sheets off to see his sister, but then he saw his sister holding a knife. Chris became scared again and snuggled into his pillow. Chris, Nina said in a whispered tone. Then Nina asked her little brother a question. Am I beautiful? Nina asks him. Chris stayed quiet as he held his pillow tightly. Oh, come on, Chris, I didn't do anything bad. Nina said. She hid her hands in her back while crossing her fingers. It's a sign that Nina was lying to her little brother. You know, I feel much better now. Let's start a new life. Will you come with me? Nina said as she gets closer to Chris. Little brother Chris nodded at her. Oh, good boy. If you want to join me, just go to sleep, my prince. Nina kicked up the front door of the house while carrying her little brother on her back. Chris was dead. His dead body was smiling, which looks very innocent, but his eyes were wide open. That makes him look like he's still alive, but in reality he's already dead. He's covered in blood and has multiple stabs. Nina took a few steps at the entrance, and she slowly looked at her little brother. Chris, I'll kill more people and make them all asleep, Nina said as she put down her little brother on the ground. Then she walked away in the streets. And that was Nina the Killer. Final thoughts? Ugh. God. Hideously contrived, clearly a fan fiction of sorts. How it got to be a famous creepypasta, man. Is only because he made an appearance there, I guess. I mean, to start with, the author mentioned the name of the mother, but yet that was a one-note occurrence. At no time, even before I went to edit this thing, did she ever use her mom's name again. She just said Nina's mother throughout the rest of it. Now, as a writer, I just have to say this. If you're going to mention a person's name in a story, try to be consistent with it as much as possible while exchanging it with he, she, they, or something between it, so it's not too repetitive. But never this person's mother when you've already named the mother. You know, that's just, unfortunately, well, writing's so bad, I'm glad I have Grammarly to make sure I don't fall into those traps. But even with all that aside, it was an interesting read for what it was worth, and I would say it's about average as written pieces go that I've had to skim through, read through, and edit. But yeah, this is one that I don't think even I could fix unless I was completely awake for it. And frankly, most of the time that I'm ever writing, I'm half asleep myself, so yeah, I did my best for the time I had, and in any event, this has been episode 19 of Monster Mondays, and it was an interesting unofficial drinking game of sorts, where every time a cliche came up, or whenever I just wanted to reach for a drink, I reached for a drink. And with that, we've gone over pretty much all of the short form stories except for the ones having to do with dolls, so that'll be our next theme for the next show for next week. So look forward to that. This has been the Forsaken Scribe, and remember, Mom's not here, kids.